After the formal close at 7 p.m., the Zoom link will be open until 7:30 for further unrecorded and unmoderated discussion in what we call the parking lot, because most good stuff, conversations happen in the parking lot after the meeting. I'd like to remind you of the 4 agreements that will make these conversations helpful to all of us. 1, stay engaged. 2, experience discomfort. That's what it's all about, experiencing change. 3, speak your truth, not somebody else's truth, but speak your truth. And 4, accept and expect non-closure. We're not going to solve anything today, but we may make a difference in our lives. Also, people who have cared for this land for generations before the white settlers arrived. Janet, I think you're not muted. We would like to recognize that we are meeting virtually on the ancestral lands of Native nations. In Wisconsin, there are 11 federally recognized Native American sovereign nations, 6 different Ojibwe nations in northern Wisconsin, Ho-Chunk, who were removed forcibly but walked back much later and were able to buy back lands. The Potawatomi with land in Milwaukee and Forest County. Menominee are still on sacred lands that they have been inhabited for at least 14,000 years. The Oneida relocated from New York State in the early 1800s, along with Mohicans and Brothertown Indians. The former were both granted land within Menominee territory, while the latter still seek to regain federal recognition. We acknowledge these indigenous communities who have stewarded this land through the generations and pay respect to their elders, past and present. And now the meeting will start as Amy Levy moderates it. Here you go, Amy.
Thank you, Neil. Tonight's going to be a little different. We are so fortunate to have some special guests with us from Allies of Native Nations. So we have a few people that I am going to refer to as guest contributors. So I will introduce each of them one at a time, and they will share some information that they have curated for us before each of our 3 video clips. And then after each of the video clips, as normal, we will open it up for discussion. So our first guest contributor is Ms. Renee Bew. And Renee, I yield the floor to you so you can share with us.
Thank you, Amy. I am Renee Bew, and I'm the Programming and Outreach Coordinator at Hedberg Public Library and Inclusive Services Consultant for Arrowhead Library System, along with being one of the members of the Allies of Native Nations subcommittee of the Diversity Action Team. Tonight, my video is going to talk about the perspective of Indigenous peoples when it comes to Thanksgiving, and some of the things as we're watching this video clip that I would like for you to think about are the fact that Native people were giving thanks before the Pilgrims arrived, before European settlers arrived, and not just on one date a year, but multiple times a year. And then also, maybe if you can think about this year, what it is about how you celebrate Thanksgiving, how that's different than perhaps the way that it's celebrated by Native people. And then also, why do you think some people are so attached to the false histories of Thanksgiving that we have been taught? And I will tell you, in one part, it does talk about libraries and books that are available at libraries. I will just say, please come to the library to look for any resources. We've done a pretty good job in trying to curate some books that have different perspectives. So with that, Amy, we can go ahead and start the first video.
The audio is not playing.
So Dennis, let's set the record straight. Okay, let's talk about the origins of Thanksgiving. Pilgrims and Native Americans didn't sit down at the same table. Was Thanksgiving really created to profile this fictitious event? What actually happened, and what is Thanksgiving supposed to be?
Well, historically, American Indians gave thanks yearly, and this has been prior to contact. And so American Indians had always known to give Thanksgiving each and every year, and sometimes during the seasons throughout the year. Particularly the Wampanoag, they had Thanksgiving feasts throughout the year as well.
Absolutely. And Josh, I know that one of the things that when we're talking about these types of conversations, people get a little up in arms. They have right here Pronies, and here it is, the HuffPost Live Thanksgiving degradation segment. Shaking my head. Laura Henri, it's not my history. My people were still in Norway when the Pilgrims punked the Indians. And Justice Holmes responds, with all due respect, if you are an American, it's part of your history. But one of the problems you have, Jacqueline, is when you are trying to share more knowledge, people have it in their heart and mind what Thanksgiving is to them and their family, and it makes the conversation a lot more difficult to get through.
I think that's why I try to share in my piece about, as a Native American who celebrates Thanksgiving, how I reinterpret the event, how I understand it, how I come to terms with the truth of, how the Holocaust, how terrible it was, and yet come to some understanding of it using the lens of my own culture.
Absolutely. Tara, you also are a writer for the Huffington Post. You have this piece right here that I want to pull it up. It's in the politics vertical. Thankfulness and rewriting history. Speak to that.
Last year, I had a piece that was Native American Heritage Month braided with Thanksgiving. And I reflected on, similar to what Jacqueline did, what Thanksgiving means to me as a Native person, and my feelings of what it's like in the school system and parents, teachers who continue to teach the story of the first Thanksgiving. Although I'm a mother and a grandmother now, I find that in the school system and within parents, I'm still finding the story that Dennis tells, where we're humiliated as school children, being told to bring brown paper bags to school and dress as Indians.
Absolutely. And it's an interesting situation when you're dealing with that personal humiliation in the face of what is easily found at the library and bookstores. Let's take a look at a slideshow of some books that depict this time of the year. And Chase Ironeyes, thank you so much for joining. We love having you as a guest here on HuffPost Live. Tell us, when you see things like this, what goes through your mind? What are your feelings?
Well, given the history of genocide and sort of the colonial legacies that we still live through today, including the control of our curricula and the institutions that help form our children's self-image and our self-determination into the future, every year in a fashion, we have to deal with Halloween costumes. We've got to deal with our own kids being asked to dress up as Indians and sort of make mockery of their own histories and their own identities for the purposes of entertainment, almost in our school systems every year. My children go to a predominantly non-Indian grade school, and we've had to have discussions to make sure that this doesn't occur, or if something does occur, that we're involved in a legitimate and authentic re-education of school-age children, so we can actually change minds.
All right, so let me pull up the chat. Renee, don't go too far because you might want to help field some of these questions. Let's see how it goes. We have about 40 people on the call. We may be able to just one by one ask your questions. If we start to talk over each other, if you could just put a question mark in the chat or type your question in the chat, then I will address you appropriately. What does that stir up for anyone? This isn't usually a quiet group. Do you have similar experiences? Oh, someone's chiming in.
Actually, it's Mary. I'm sorry. I was late for that part, the first part. I was trying to get in on my tablet and I had to change to my phone. So I missed that whole first section of what had been talked about. I apologize.
Oh,
I'll
no
have
worries.
to wait for the next one.
Is there anyone that wanted to comment on the piece we just watched? Was that an experience that you had as a school-age child, or maybe an experience with your children or grandchildren? Was your experience completely different?
My experience was exactly what we learned about in this little segment of the video. When I was a child, we did all these things. We dressed up like Indians and pilgrims and did the whole thing. And even all the years that I was a counselor in the Janesville school system, I watched kindergarten classes sit down together as little Indians and pilgrims. So I know that those old false narratives might still be out there. I'm not sure. I'm retired now, so I'm not sure if the Janesville teachers are moving away from that now. I kind of hope they have. Yeah.
I know.
Thank you, Barbara.
Renee, maybe you could remind us of the difference between the standard narrative and the false.
As far as again, I think standard narrative is European settlers came to what is now the East Coast of the United States and basically made friends with the native peoples and were very thankful because they saved them by providing them food, and they sat down to a meal, and the narrative that is a opposing narrative, I guess I would say, is that the native peoples were, as I think the first speaker might have said in the video, native peoples were already giving thanks and having ceremonies throughout the year. In fact, they were done at least at every change of season, and oftentimes more often than that. And also coming together in a peaceful way was not necessarily the case, and especially for the Wampanoag, which was mentioned in the video as well. Another thing that I don't believe was mentioned in this video, but there's discussion about, is the representation of the native people as savages and always wearing like a loincloth and hardly any clothing. But if you think about it, November in Massachusetts is pretty cold. So the likelihood of that being the garb of the male indigenous people is very unlikely. So there are a number of falsehoods to the narrative that we have learned in grade school, especially, and throughout our education.
Thank you, Renee. And Kelly, thank you for contributing to the chat and posting that to everyone so everyone can see that comment. Basically reiterating that, yeah, this was a similar experience. I was at Sam's the other day. Well, let me back up. My question for everyone is, as you're learning things differently and as you have these new perspectives, how does that change the way you celebrate Thanksgiving? If at all, I would love to hear from everyone. And on a personal note, I was at Sam's Club the other day and I love the greeters there, and I'm walking in and we chit chat for a little bit and I'm walking out and they're like, oh, stay warm. And I'm like, oh, happy Thanksgiving. And as soon as I said it, I felt bad. And I'm like, oh, let me think about why that feels bad to me. And I'm like, oh, I should have told him like Happy Indigenous People Day, or like some acknowledgement that no, like the way we've always learned it is not accurate. It is not reflective of how I want to currently celebrate. So I'm wondering who else in this meeting with this new information, you're like, yeah, some of it might be reminders. How, if at all, does that change the way you view your traditional Thanksgiving and what things are different?
It's a really good question, Amy. I hope somebody says something because I had a similar experience where I went, oh, wait.
I think that if we look at other two videos, we'd have a better sense of, Mark is echoing me, I think. Mark, can you stop that? That we'd have a better sense of what we're aiming at here, because one of them is about the myth and what it all means to us, and then the other one is the one that Renee talked about. It is like a way to live in the world where the myth still exists, but making efforts to overcome the myths, the narratives, the stereotypes. And then the third one is, and I can't remember which one I was supposed to introduce, but the third one is about total resistance, like we're not even going to talk about this. We have very little to be thankful for. We have the genocide, and so on and so on. We are not going to do it that way anymore. So it's about people who have developed other ways, Native Americans, I think, mostly, who have developed other ways to make this day or this time period, fall, harvest, worthy and special without any connection to the Thanksgiving myth thing. So I'm sorry I forgot who else was doing this, and I skipped all over your presentation too. So I'm sorry about that. But I think if we could see those, it would be easier to understand.
You got to be patient, Janet. We're going to get there in just a minute, but we do want to leave space for this discussion on this video, and then we'll take it one video at a time. So is there anyone else who would like to share if this is changing the way that you are celebrating Thanksgiving? Maybe you're not celebrating Thanksgiving. Maybe there's a specific reason for that. Maybe there is a replacement tradition or something that you want to add in. I would love to hear from you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I've had my hand up for quite a while, and I also tried to
Yes.
I unmute myself. I wasn't sure if I was doing it, but I just want to jump back just a minute, because I am a former kindergarten first grade teacher in the public schools in Beloit, and I definitely, taught all of those things with gusto, and the feasts and the Indians and the Pilgrims, and it was great fun. But then as I became more aware, that I really had to think about how to alter that. And I did notice that a lot of the literature was starting to be more sensitive. A lot of the, like the weekly readers we would use and stuff would show Native Americans, just going about their life, but you still had to explain it like, okay, they're just like regular people, which implies that there's us and then them, and so it was always difficult because I wanted the children to just, even though we did not have a Native American population in Beloit very much, at that time. This was in the 70s and 80s. I just tried very hard to, to make it seem more, I don't know, equitable or something. So I think that if I were to go back and do it now and still had to teach the first Thanksgiving, I would very much emphasize that there were all these beautiful nations, here already in this country existing and so diverse. And that, when people came over, they were already celebrating these beautiful, celebrations of Thanksgiving every year, and how nice it was that, yes, they could get together and help each other. But I think even with little kids, you could be honest and say this wasn't always the case, that, some bad things were brought in, like disease, and some fighting occurred, a loss of their culture and so on. So I think if we start with the very youngest kids and start telling the truth, but in a gentle way that makes sense to them, I think it's very, very doable. And I think we can all appreciate the concept of Thanksgiving, but within our own, understanding of what that is, for the area that we move in. Is that making sense at all?
It does. Thank you, Ms. McCann, for sharing an educator perspective. And I love the way you framed it. Like, if I could go back and teach it again, these are the things I would do differently. So I really appreciate that. Are there, Janet, I see a hand. And if not all of us are appearing on the same screen, I don't want you to feel ignored if you are waving your hand. But if there is a lull in the conversation, please jump in or put your question in the chat or even a question mark, and then I'll know to come to you. Janet, you wanted to add?
I was listening to these efforts to make the first Thanksgiving be something worthy and credible and American. And I remember reading somewhere that Lincoln is the one who established the Thanksgiving time period. That was after or during the Civil War, I can't remember which. But my question is, why do we need a first Thanksgiving? Why? To me, that first Thanksgiving just meant, okay, here's all these settlers, and they actually managed not to starve. So that'd be good. But they're not even Americans at that point. And okay, so they didn't starve because some Indians came along and helped, gave them a little bit of food, and that was really nice. But Indians are like that, all kinds of people. So good for the Indians, and then you go and genocide them. And that's not part of the story, the mythical story, but it's part of the true story.
I think, unfortunately, in American culture and in white supremacist culture, that people like to make themselves the hero of the story. And we have seen time and time again how that manifests and what that looks like and the harm it causes in those that are left out or those that are completely lied upon, and it is not accurate to what actually happened. But in a lot of cases, I don't think that really matters. As long as you have a hero and it gets passed along, I think that some of that is the kind of the feature and not the bug.
And I think it would be a very good point, as I say, with the little ones to take this, and since it is a celebrated national holiday, to just start again and say, make the Indians the star of the story, make the Native Americans, make the tribes and the nations, that had so much diversity, and just say, people came in, they met them for the first time, and then go into kind of leave the whole first Thanksgiving thing, but use this to just celebrate a celebration of Indigenous people, during that month, if you're going to have a month to do that or whatever, or that week. I think that would be amazing.
I
My
think it would be
personal
useful to
opinion is
keep-
why, oh, sorry, that doesn't happen is because that's a beautiful first half of the story. But then what happens to all of those beautiful people that we just discussed? They were
Exactly.
massacred. They, you know, and not too many people are willing to tell that second half. So it makes it really difficult to start the first half.
It does, because when do they get old enough to know that second half? Because I mean, I don't think the Trail of Tears and some of those things are even really taught that much. And, you know, one of our country's greatest shames, you know, so you think do most people think it'd be better just not to even do this? Not even.
Well, the Allies for Native Nations, which is a group in Rock County that works on Native American issues, have spent a lot of time dealing with the Columbus myth.
Right.
And so have other places around the country, until we have, I think, come to the point where a lot of people are saying, we can't do that anymore. We can have Indigenous days or weeks or months or whatever, but we can't celebrate a man who massacred people, raped women, abused them, stole them, did it all for the money. So I think that Thanksgiving needs some reworking, seriously. But boy, it's going to be a hard sell.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Mary, I see you with the cute hand icon. Please jump in.
Yes, you know, I've been dealing with this whole issue for a while now, in terms of how to celebrate it at home. And you know, unfortunately, it's kind of been just for us more of our time to be together as a family. You know, not that we're thankful all the time, but it gives us all the time together to be together and I guess voice our thankfulness, you know, and what we're thankful for, not so much that we emphasize, you know, what our ancestors, my ancestors went through. But now that my grandson is going to be 10 years old and I'm thinking of this now, you know, how do I explain to him? I think I've been explaining to him since he was a baby, and all the things that I've got in my home of all our native stuff, our drums, you know, things like that, photos, you know, of chiefs and poems, things like that, our native prayers and whatnot. He asked me a lot of them, you know, about books that I have, of folklores and things like that, stories, native stories and whatnot. And I think I've explained to him in a manner, because I think to explain to children about the reality of what, you know, what our my ancestors went through, and how we lost so many of them, and how we lost so much of our culture, that now, you know, trying to get back into it as an older woman now too, for the sake of my children and my grandchildren, to keep that going for them, that they are more curious about what natives went through, you know. So I kind of leave it to them to kind of ask me questions, but be able to have the answer for them, you know, give them, if the more they see something, the more a child gets interested in it, and the more curious it's going to be. So it's going to be a natural thing for them to want to find out about it, rather than try to find a way to explain that to them. And I think if our schools had more things of the native culture, they would have a chance to ask more questions and make it more of a child being interested in something, rather than try to figure out, us as adults try to figure out, you know, how to explain something to them, you know, because my grandson does know of, you know, the you know, the things that they went through, the what the women and children went through and what the men went through and how they went through it. And not so much as terms of what color the people were, but why they did what they did, as opposed to trying to make it a color thing or a hero type thing as well. So I don't know if that helps, maybe would help the school system to better engage in something like this rather than lose it in the school system, in which, I've seen it being lost over the years. My children have gone to school, and I remember as a young girl in elementary school here in Walworth County, I had worn a pair of moccasins to school. They were my thing. I loved them. They were my shoes. And my teacher told me that I wasn't allowed to wear slippers to school. And I just kind of looked and I thought, what do you mean I can't wear? These are my shoes. They're moccasins. No, those are slippers. You cannot wear them. And I said, well, okay. And I don't remember really what happened after that, if I had gone sent to the principal's office for it or what the case was. But for some reason, that's the one and only thing that really bothered me about, what made me realize that somewhere, somehow, somebody saw that I was different, and I wasn't even trying to be. I was just myself. I was just a young girl wearing what she wears comfortably, what's comfortable to her to wear to school. So I guess this is such a passionate thing for me. I'm sorry. Am I overtaking that?
I was just gonna jump in and say you've given us so much to think about and kind of fuel the discussion. So thank you for that. So I guess the first thing that I would kind of attach to in your response is, I think it's incumbent on all of us that we have this information, that we reach out to our schools, because it's easy to criticize and critique. It's much more work to reach out and say, hey, I think it's critically important that you give an accurate accounting of what happened. And these are some ideas of great ways I think you could do it. And I know Mary Ramirez, and she would be a great resource. Or I know someone from Allies of Native Nations, and they would be a great resource. And so that correction, saying, hey, this is not okay, but also jumping in and your willingness to help to create positive change, I think is awesome. One comment in the chat that I wanted to highlight. Thank you, Katie. She wrote, I think we need to get away from the idea that kids can't handle the truth. Without going on a long personal tangent, when our kids we have been very intentional about grounding our kids in their Blackness. We went to the Lorraine Motel, which was the site of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and our children were exposed to that and the recreation of the bus bombing, etc. And when we got home, my 4-year-old daughter at the time came to me and she said, Mommy, I don't want to be Black anymore. And my knee-jerk reaction was, yes, you do. We love being Black. And she was like, no, I don't, Mommy. They kill Black people. And thank God for 2 parents. I tag teamed my husband and I'm like, Tag, you're it, fix this. Mama's out of tools. And whatever he said to her, she came back 30 minutes later, fist in the air saying, I'm Black and I'm proud, singing James Brown. So the point to that quick story is kids can handle the truth and sometimes can process it better than us adults. And if we give them that at an early age, it doesn't seem scary, it doesn't seem taboo, and it gives them information they need to process and to question and to say, no, I don't think that's right. It doesn't make sense that someone is half naked, like Renee pointed out in Massachusetts in November. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. But when we give them accurate information, then that is helping their growth and their discovery and their formation of their thoughts and ideas. So thank you so much for that. Robert, I see a hand. Janet, I see a finger wagging. I'll get to you in just a second. Robert? Oh, you're muted.
Hello?
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is, excuse me. It's my first time using Zoom. When my child was born, my best friend sent me a book on the Holocaust, on the Holocaust of the Jews in Europe during the Second World War, that Holocaust. So there are ways, and it was a book targeted to very young children. So there are ways to tell difficult stories to very young people, to children, even if, you know, if you're willing to deal with the realities. There's no way to tell the story and make the Europeans the heroes of this. The fact is, Europeans came here and their project was to take the land away from the people who lived here. And, you know, that's the story that has to be told. And that's not going to be told in our schools. So we can reach out to our schools and try to encourage them to be less blatantly wrong in the stories they tell, but we're not going to, at least in the foreseeable future, see the story accurately represented in, you know, in schools where curricula are determined by a broad range of people, many of whom are going to be fully invested in continuing to try to portray the Europeans as heroes. So we have to then make it our own project to tell those stories accurately to the people in our lives. I was particularly struck by the comments of Chase Ironeyes about how the mechanisms in his life, or the structures in his life, prevent or, you know, have the United States government interfere in the curricula that he is able, or his community is able to offer his children. And that's something that I think maybe in a way of Thanksgiving, if we want to offer thanks to, you know, the people on whose land we live, maybe we can take responsibility for taking in hand some of the mechanisms of our own government. In the Black Lives Matter, in the context of Black Lives Matter, people are saying defund the police. I prefer reform the police, in the sense that if we take the model of Camden, New Jersey, they closed their police department down and reformed it from scratch. People had to reapply and say why they would be good community police officers. Why can't we address the institutional racism in the, I think it's called the Bureau of Indian Affairs? I'm not sure, but you know, there are structures in our government, which is supposed to be responsive to us, that are extremely invasive in Native people's lives, to the point of where they can't determine their own children's curricula. So things we can do, action item, make contact with someone who's living that life in our own area or community. I certainly intend to do that. Now I have an email address I can reach out to. And then learn about that person's life and the particular struggles they have with the institutions that they deal with and the institutional racism that they deal with, and then turn around and use what power we have to reform those structures in our government that continue to harm these people. Thank you.
Robert, welcome to Zoom. We are so happy to have you and that you used your first Zoom experience to join us. And thank you for those very insightful and well thought out comments. I would encourage you and ask that you stick around for the parking lot after, because that is a great place to connect with people and talk through some of those action items that you discussed. Janet, is it okay if I go to Steve first? Somebody sent me a message that Steve had his hand up, only because you are my next guest contributor, and I'm hoping you can weave your comments into your intro of the next video clip. Is that okay with you, Janet?
I don't even know which one. Which one is the next one?
Oh, it's going to be a surprise to everyone then. And then as a reminder, I hate for anyone to feel like I'm overlooking you or I'm ignoring you, but my screen says that we have 2 other screens. So if you're not on my screen and you're raising your hand, I can't see it. So please, if there's a lull, jump right in, or if you put a question mark or your question in the comments, then I'll know to call on you. But Steve, please share.
Yes, thank you, Amy. A year and a half ago, I was the chairperson of the Equal Opportunities Commission in Beloit. And I had Billy Bob Grand come down and speak to the commission, and he had crafted a resolution regarding observing Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day. And we passed that as a commission and sent it on to the city council for approval to recognize that. Ended up not hearing virtually any feedback on that for a long time. At the October meeting, it was brought up. By that time, I was no longer serving on the commission, but I was at that meeting. But I think what they finally did, the city council, and this is pure projection on my part, was to say, oh, geez, Steve's got a bug about this. Let's throw him a bone. We'll recognize it this one time. And so they passed the resolution and did so. But the idea I got was the city council really, unless I had continued to kind of pressure them, didn't want to deal with it because of the potential backlash from folks that said, come on, Columbus Day, what's wrong with Columbus Day? Going through all that type of thing. This relates to a bunch of comments that have been put in the comment field about can children handle the truth, or is it the adults that can't handle the truth? I think there's just a whole lot of baggage there, and I'm almost positive they did not renew that proclamation this past October. So not only is there the issue of bringing it to attention, but how do you keep the awareness there of what has been done and where do we go from here, and how do we figure out new ways to recognize our history so that we don't always make the same mistakes? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And that is so important. And I feel like part of the issue is once you acknowledge something, then the onus is that you got to do something about it. And you need to do something substantive, because I know I am. I'm tired of lip service. So don't just acknowledge it if it doesn't have any teeth to it, if you don't have any follow-up, etc. And then it all gets complicated and it gets messy, and then I need to be committed and be consistent and etc. And so I just walk away. I do want to read, Mark, thank you for sharing that. I think this is critically important. I think we have to be honest that when we are talking about protecting children, we are talking about protecting white children. Children of color often have adverse racial and cultural experiences at very young ages. Studies also show that people of color are far more likely to have discussions regarding race and culture with their children in order to prepare them for the society at large. I know that's definitely true in my household. And I was reading a study a while ago, I don't want to get the number wrong, but it was way too high for my taste, that the number of microaggressions that our children experience just on an average day at school. So Mark, well said, and unfortunately, I agree completely with you. Janet, I've not been ignoring you. I'm even going to pitch you the title. Your video clip is "What Does Thanksgiving Mean to Native Americans?" Janet, take it away. Janet, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I thought we already did what does, Thanksgiving mean to Native Americans. One I was interested in it is what does Thanksgiving mean to me? And it was about Native Americans who have decided that they can't continue the myth anymore. And I wanted to go back and relate that to something that Mary said, Mary Belo, that she thinks that Thanksgiving is a myth for adults so that they feel comfortable. Well, I think the way it works for white kids, as Mark is saying, is you have to indoctrinate the white kids about Thanksgiving and wonderful white people so that when they get to be adults, the myth has continuing value for them and they don't want to give it up. So if I'm talking about the right video here, it is Native Americans who acknowledge their past, know it, and then have found different ways to do something activist about, I can't say Thanksgiving, but something activist about this time of year.
All right, I am going to share my screen and we will watch the video.
As a Native American, what does Thanksgiving mean to me?
Loss of land, genocide, rape. I don't celebrate, the arrival. I don't celebrate Plymouth Rock.
Thanksgiving, historically, is the murder of the entire village. Thanksgiving is not about Native Americans and pilgrims eating peaceably together. That is not the history. My wife and I actually fast on that day in memory of those people. We don't eat anything.
People that need to be cooked for to feed and empower and uplift other folks. Usually it's just recommitting myself to activism, fighting, the colonization.
As a Native American, it's not easy. There are a lot of issues we face on a day-to-day basis. Either we are completely wise or we are uneducated savages.
They're using their political and financial power against Indigenous peoples to take our land, to poison the earth, and to poison ultimately our people.
Oh, that was the right one.
I'm glad it lined up, Janet. So that gave us a lot to think about. Even the gentleman in the video saying that, how much is of a shift is it for us to contemplate not, how many dishes we're going to make and, pre-COVID-19, who was bringing the favorite dish and who's making the mac and cheese and are we frying the turkey, are we whatever, to think of, no, I fast on that day and I remember the people and I remember the land. And I remember the people who were raped, etc. So definitely a shift from how we traditionally think of spending Thanksgiving. Does that bring up anything for you? Does that make you look at things differently?
I think for me, the phrase that just stuck out in that last video was, I cook for the people who need food. And that needs to be the emphasis for, if we're going to have Thanksgiving, that's what it needs to be. We all, so many of us have so much more than we need. And the second sentence was, you are on stolen land. Yeah.
And what that made me think of is how we talk about immigrants and sometimes labeling people as illegal. And I've seen several signs at protests saying, how is anyone illegal on stolen land? And it makes me think of the intersectionality and how our experiences are connected. And so some people are willing to point a finger, but let's take it back one step prior. And what did it look like there? How did you treat the people that were here and the land, etc.?
Yeah.
So Amy, for me, hi, Amy. For me, it reminds me of the speech that Frederick Douglass did in 1852. What to the slave is the 4th of July. That's what I equate that to in terms of thinking about Thanksgiving for Native or Indigenous people as we celebrate the 4th. As we think about that, think about the 4th of July in terms of African Americans. Whose Independence Day is that really?
Absolutely. And it also makes me think of so many people that have no idea what Juneteenth is, you know, and how Juneteenth and the 4th of July connect and disconnect, and Thanksgiving and Indigenous Peoples Day. And then what do you do for the 4th of July? Do you reclaim ownership and shift it and make it work for you in a way that honors the sacrifice? Do you ignore it? Do you, so I think it's interesting how people process and what works for them.
I was just going to share that I think in the background there was Standing Rock. So I think it's important for the connection to be made, you know, not just stolen land, but ongoing poisoned land. So we're talking about the history, and those are some of the comments I'll make for the next video, is some of the history that they sort of mentioned real briefly, but it's today that we're thinking about too. Very much the pipelines, the threats to water, and people are giving their all right now to save the land for all of us, not just for themselves. And I think that's something that I always keep in mind when I think about Thanksgiving, and how to sort of balance these very contradictory sets of knowledge. Right?
And Yvonne, thank you so much for bringing or highlighting that point of I cook for the people that need to be cooked for. And let's expand that. So this year with COVID-19, I know a lot of things look so different. So maybe you're not physically cooking for people, but it may mean a donation, a monetary gift. It may be volunteering in some way that is safe, but basically helping people that need to be helped. And hopefully in those populations, that definitely includes Indigenous people. But I would love for us to broaden that and find a way that we can contribute that keeps us safe, but is also very fulfilling for us as individuals. So we have a few more minutes before we need to go into our final section. Oh, did I hear someone?
Yeah, it was me. I'm just thinking that since so many of us are celebrating by Zooming, not having the face-to-face contact, but still the opportunity to communicate with each other, this feels like it would be a good opportunity for us to lead into the discussion. I don't know how many of your families have talked about the real meaning of Thanksgiving. I've even realized the depth of what it means, but just in opening up the conversation with so many things, it seems like 2020 is the year to just, bring it all out. And so in our own ways, it can provide us an opportunity to start the conversation.
I like where you're going with that, Jean, because 2020 is going to be different for everybody. So let's talk about how we can make some more changes in our Thanksgiving traditions.
Make it really different. Jean, I love that. There are about 41 of us in the meeting now. So just imagine if 41 of these conversations are happening on Thursday with our Zoom meetings, our phone calls, our however we are connecting with loved ones. I'm going to give you my unbiased opinion. I am hoping that you are not in person with large groups of people, that we are staying safe. Soapbox put away, but I hope that we are making great decisions that are keeping all of us safe for the long run. But yeah, Jean, I like that. I take that as a challenge issue to all of us to make sure that your Thanksgiving conversation shares some of the information that we're covering tonight. All right, we are going to go ahead and go into this third segment a little early, which I am completely comfortable with because...
Can I give a little bit of a intro to it? Is that
Yep,
cool?
I'm going to hand it off to you in just a minute because this third video, I think, is going to spark a lot of discussion. And our final guest contributor for the evening is Holly Denning, and she has some information she wants to share before we watch our final clip. Holly?
Right. This is a really good, a little more shocking. I think the last one was also, we were kind of ramping them up, right? From the first one to the third. I'll also just say I have been teaching a lot of these issues for many years, and race and ethnic studies and American Indian studies, and my students at UW-Whitewater and elsewhere, my students always say, you know, I want to know more, right? And why didn't I learn this when I was a kid? So returning to that, that earlier comment, I do think that some of the history is important, even the recent history as well as older history. So since the 70s, a lot of things have changed following on this awareness from the American Indian movement. So I think that's kind of, we're feeling the ripples from the 70s on. It was not just civil rights for African Americans, but American Indian movement was a big deal. And more education has happened not only to those of us that are non-Indians, but for Native peoples. They don't know their own history because if it's not taught in the schools at all, right? How are they going to necessarily learn it either? So it's really been a shift since the 70s. But I'm actually from New England, so I learned a lot about this stuff from way back. And I think some of it, I started to learn alternative history. So, but I've learned a lot more in more recent years. So the Wampanoag did teach, you know, how to plant the 3 sacred sisters, the corn, squash, and beans. And they did have a feast, according to some of the scholars, but it was not a Thanksgiving. It was a political alliance that they were building against the Narragansett. And a lot of different tribes in this area. The Wampanoag are from Cape Cod, Narragansett, and Pequot more in Connecticut area. And the reason the Narragansett were sort of on the rise and ascendance was because in 1616 to 19, there had been a plague pretty much that wiped out 90% of the Wampanoag. So there had been people that had landed already, and they had those germs, and it spread like wildfire. So there was a really serious need for the Wampanoag to find allies. So it's good to be allies of Native nations even way back. And then a couple different things that were mentioned in the last clip and in the one coming forward was massacres. It was a particular massacre they're talking about in 1637 with the Pequot, and 500 men, women, and children were burned before they even woke up in the morning. So this was a really big deal. That's what you'll hear in the next clip. They kind of reference it briefly. And the other thing they reference briefly is what Janet mentioned. In 1863 was when Lincoln announced Thanksgiving to be a national holiday after Gettysburg, right? So there was a significant battle to be grateful for. However, I gotta say the year before that, in 1862, was the largest hanging of anybody, largest execution in US history. 38 Dakota warriors were hanged. And so that also, people need to know these things. They're gonna kind of briefly hit them, but I wanted to just give a little bit more background. But I am also really seeing healing happening across Indian country and across really the nation. So there's this balance between learning this and really embracing it while also feeling you know, that we have to honor our own holidays and the love that we have for families and our gratitude. So I love Neil's comment to, you know, bring in the 4 directions and have some prayers that are really based in in those traditions as Mother Earth is increasingly at risk from us. So those are my comments before we watch this next really pretty amazing young Native women.
Perfect segue. I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Happy Thanksgiving, America. I'm Donna, and I'm here with my friends to tell you the real history behind this holiday. Growing up, I knew that what they told you in school about Thanksgiving wasn't true. That's not the true story. The true story behind Thanksgiving was after every killing of a whole village, these European settlers celebrated it, and they called it Thanksgiving. But it wasn't until Abraham Lincoln became president that it became an official holiday. He ordered 38 Dakota men to be hung for war crimes after the sacred holiday Christmas. We take this time to remember our elders who lost their lives due to what really happened. Usually my mom makes a Native American dish for us and we pray. Growing up, I would be kind of annoyed that they didn't know what actually happened on Thanksgiving and that they're actually celebrating the deaths of many people, tribes that were lost. Whether it's to give thanks, and learn how the holiday was established in the first place. I'm thankful for being born indigenous to this continent. I'm thankful that I still have my culture. I'm thankful that my elders kept our culture alive all these years. I'm thankful to be indigenous, resilient, and alive. I'm thankful for us all to be able to stand together, stand strong, and stand as one. Happy Thanksgiving, America.
So what's our feedback to that?
It feels like a kick in the teeth, actually. But I understand it. It's just that I've always loved a holiday in which I can express my thanks and my gratitude. So as a white person, I think Thanksgiving has been my favorite holiday because I can express my love and gratitude to my family and sit down and have a meal. But when I think about the meaning, the historical meaning of the beginning of Thanksgiving, it makes me really sick. And then I feel like I should hate Thanksgiving. So I'm trying to separate out those two feelings of being ashamed of my European ancestors, but also in the present day, really loving the idea of having a special day to give thanks.
So Holly, can you confirm? I mean, is truly that's after Abraham Lincoln, after the Dakota warriors were hung? That's when we got our first holiday of Thanksgiving?
A year later, yeah. So 1862 was the Dakota conflict in Minnesota. And long story short, they tried 300 people, and the idea was that they were hanging people who were guilty, but there's all kinds of falsehoods around that. And then it was 1863 that Gettysburg happened, and so the first Thanksgiving was a year later.
But did we celebrated Thanksgiving, quote unquote, as a nation prior to Lincoln's Declaration, and that was based on the burning of villages?
Oh, way back in 1630s, yeah. So 1637 was the Pequots. Yeah, and that is just, when you read some of the actual documents about what they were saying, they were, I mean, it does, like, Barbara, you're right, it makes you sick, that people were burned alive, and they gave thanks afterwards for their sacrifice, for the sacrifice of the white soldiers, of the Puritans. Yeah, it's pretty distressing. And this is why when I teach college level, so I don't know how you would teach little kids about that exactly. But we do have a really great resource guide that was put together. So I want to remind people too about that, to use that for learning, because we all have so much to learn. I've been learning about this every year. I learn something new about it. It's hard though, and we have to somehow balance those two. And that's some years you're more in the, oh my God, I'm so distressed mode, and other years you're like, okay, I'm grateful to work at home and I don't have to worry about COVID, right? So yeah, thanks, Vicki.
Just a comment on National Thanksgiving. There had been many days of Thanksgiving proclaimed going back to 1777 by the Continental Congress, written by Sam Adams. And once again, oftentimes in relation to war or something like that. With Lincoln, it wasn't an official day from then on. Grant proclaimed Thanksgiving and Easter and Christmas and New Year's as official holidays, but only for the District of Columbia. And then in 1939, Roosevelt tried to move Thanksgiving because it was celebrated on the last Thursday of the month, and there were 5 Thursdays in 39, and he wanted the merchants to have a longer period of time for selling to help with the Depression. And so it wasn't, and different states went along with that and different states didn't. And a part of it was because of the college football games on Thanksgiving were the traditional end of the season. And it was just all kinds of crazy stuff. And so it wasn't until 42, end of 41, after the Thanksgiving of 41, that it was officially proclaimed as a national holiday for the 4th Thursday of the month. So it's been kind of a checkered history the whole time.
Barbara, I just want to highlight, thank you for the honesty and how you're feeling after watching that. It struck me that you shared that felt like a kick in the teeth and you were kind of conflicted. So thank you for sharing that. Is it possible to hold those two feelings at the same time? To acknowledge the history of what was happened and the terrible massacres and rapes and etc. And also use that time to be very intentional about sharing with your family and being thankful. But I think that acknowledgement is such a huge piece to that. So thank you for sharing that. I love that they were young, strong Native girls, young women in that video that were sharing how proud they are of their culture and how frustrated they were that everyone didn't know what they knew. And so I love the power in that video.
I'm kind of struggling with something related but different from Barb's experience. In that in my family, we did the Pilgrim crafts in 1st grade, and then I never heard about them again. They weren't at the table, they weren't in the discussion, and it was very much, it was a family holiday. And the food was there to bind us to family. So that has been my association with Thanksgiving. And yet those Pilgrim crafts just never go away. And so there's this, I have this experience of this family bonding time, but I can totally see how someone who is Native, they see the crafts every year and it's an in-your-face reminder. But I don't know what to do about that. That's just where I'm processing right now.
Thank you for being honest about that. And you didn't ask for a suggestion, but I am going to offer one. I think that you and all of us, we control our space and our sphere. And if we want the Pilgrim Crafts to go away, then we stop participating in the Pilgrim Crafts. And that solves it for your space. And hopefully that spreads. But control the things you can control. I think that's a really great place to start. And you may want to share, you know, and this is post-COVID when we're all back together again, why I am intentional that I don't do the Pilgrim Crafts, because it's harmful to me and to others. And I personally, I think that's a really great place to start. Beth, I feel like you're searching for your mute button.
No, I was thinking I could make some better facial expressions. Mary, you totally got me with the Pilgrim Crafts, because last year when my son was in kindergarten, my husband and I both went to the elementary school, and I mean, they weren't dressed like Native Americans, but boy, those kindergartners were all dressed like pilgrims for their feast day. So we were quietly making jokes about, you know, whether they were also sharing smallpox, that kind of thing. I don't know if maybe I should have mentioned something to the teachers, or maybe I should have mentioned something to the principal. I have a feeling that I might, like these days, I probably would be more apt to say something.
Appreciate your honesty, Beth. There's no judgment here. But I know next year you're going to speak up. Robert, I see you have a hand up. Is that new or is that old?
It's old, but I'll try to be brief. I'm really happy when I see young people combine anger and determination. James Baldwin, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said something like, if you're a Black man in America and you're not angry, you need to see a psychiatrist. And I've held that saying, I've kind of taken that saying and repeated it with a slight change. If you're a person of conscience in America and you're not angry, you need to wake up. People criticize Greta Thunberg for being angry. How can a young person not be angry? So when I see that look of anger and determination on a group of young people like that, it actually makes me feel hopeful, because we will not attack the institutions that perpetuate racism with enough strength and persistence to actually change them, unless we are motivated by something very powerful. And, you know, I've been angry for a long time, and I've taken a lot of criticism in progressive communities. But you know, we've got to be motivated by something.
Robert, thank you for sharing. And James Baldwin is one of my favorite authors. And the quote is, to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. And I think that rage can be very powerful fuel if used in a healthy way. Thank you so much. We have about 15 minutes left in our discussion. We're going to cut a little bit before that for any in-house announcements from our partner groups. But with the time we have left, what else struck you from that video? Did it catch you off guard? The ending, was it something that you were expecting? Were you cheering them on when they flipped the table? And thank you, Holly, for expounding on some of the things that we heard to prep us in the video. But what are we thinking about that?
I enjoyed the drama of the flipping of the table. It was dramatic. It made an impact on me, and I always like a documentary that can do that, that can shake me a little bit. So I think it's wonderful.
Okay. Thank you.
Excellent.
Jean, did you have
Amy?
a comment?
Yeah, I agree with Barb as far as the table. I mean, that was extremely powerful. One part that that really hit me was when the soldiers were killing. They were on their horses and they were killing the Indians, the natives. And I guess I just never had seen anything like that portrayed. So that was really very striking. The other thing I'd like to say to Beth is, fortunately or unfortunately, Beth, there will be many other opportunities for you to speak up. So, you know, we learn from different situations, don't we? Yeah, and I've been there. I have been there many times, so I can make those comments. It's hard, but it's necessary.
Mary,
I wanted to say that.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the ending definitely impacted me. I didn't expect that the table to be overturned. I thought something, but wasn't that. And I think it's something that I would, if I was able to, I'd like to be able to share that with my kids, with my girls, and my grandson. I think this Thanksgiving, I think this one is going to be a little bit different with a little bit more information than what they know of and what I've been giving them over the years. Just because there is so much going on right now with, you know, the Native people, and it's not being put out in the media, and that's what I get really upset about. That's what I've been upset about, and there was just so many times I wish I had the time and the money or the resources to take a stand with them out there. That was something that I've been wanting to do for the last couple years, unfortunately. Maybe another time, but so definitely something that I will be planning still. Just to give a little more realistic views to the kids and where things have happened and how things have happened. So
I'd like to raise a point that we need to keep in the background of all that we're discussing. When the people from Europe came, they didn't have a census back then, obviously. So there were millions of Native Americans in this country, millions. By the end of the 19th century, there were approximately 250,000 Native Americans left, and they were being described as the vanishing Americans. And the notion was that if the United States kept on with the policies it was doing, including boarding schools and so on, that they would be vanished. The vanishing American, they would be gone, and we'd be all white people. And so that's a big, huge backdrop that we need to keep in mind whenever we're hearing anything like this. It's not just one massacre here and one hanging of people there. Put it all together, it's about genocide. And Thanksgiving is being grateful for genocide. That's the way I see it.
Thank you for sharing that, Janet. And one thing that stood out for me from that last video, by the way, those 3 links that I put in there are our first, second, and third videos. If anyone is interested in viewing those, just those video clips again, feel free to copy and paste those. The table was gorgeous in all of that fantastic looking food and what most of us would say was a beautiful setting. and how those powerful young Native women were willing to destroy what so many called beautiful to make the point. That imagery stood out for me, and it kind of made me think that what are some things that look beautiful, but that surface are we willing to dismantle in order to embrace the truth of the situation? And can we let go of what is perceived beautiful in search of the truth and create something that is genuinely beautiful and sustaining and honoring to all involved? Because is it really beautiful if it's causing harm to so many? So that's what that video made me think about. So I'm going to ask again. Does everything we have discussed, and it's fine if your answer is no, not at all, but I just want to check in. We have about 5 minutes left for discussion. Does anything that we've covered today, hopefully everyone has learned something or was reminded of something, or that thing that they thought they knew, it was expounded upon. Does this change the way we celebrate Thanksgiving? Does this change the way we interact with this holiday?
Well, I have some Zoom friends that I have sent a few things to this fall that weren't very well received. So I think the last video is going out for Thanksgiving. We'll see how that goes over.
Good.
You let me know, Vicki.
This is a hard time to, and people have mentioned this, a hard time to deal with this holiday and its problematics, because it's problematic also in the sense of COVID and families not being able to connect in the way they used to. It's hard to think of making a big statement when there's only 2 or 3 of you there, although that doesn't say you can't, but maybe this is a good pause moment for us to spend some time reevaluating Thanksgiving and our connection to it.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier to change when so much has been changed already.
Mm-hmm.
I was on a different Zoom about, I mean, it was about equity topics, but not related to this at all. But Gloria Ladson-Billings was on there, and her quote was, "Don't waste a good crisis." Because that's when, why would you want to, you know, don't worry about going back to the way things were because it wasn't that great. So don't waste the crisis and make the, you know, flip the switch.
I'd like to comment about the Thanksgiving. I'm really sensitive to the fact that it is such a special holiday for our family because it's always been a family time. And my sons, who are Mary Belo's age, and so, you know, when she was talking, I related to that, they much prefer Thanksgiving to Christmas because it's a time when people are, where the family's together and we're enjoying each other and we're enjoying the food and all of that. So I'm thinking, I wouldn't bring it up just on Thanksgiving. I would try to do something before Thanksgiving. I would try to prepare people ahead of time with some of this information and not, I'm afraid we're all doing Zoom Thanksgiving this year. So that's, you know, we're not going to be together anyway, but that's a big disappointment to us. But maybe we should think of November. And it is already Native American Heritage Month, to think of the month of November, of the time when we be very intentional about talking about these issues so that when Thanksgiving comes, it will be organic. The discussion can be more organic than confrontational, which I think maybe some people might get defensive, and that's never a good way to keep the discussion going. Just my thoughts.
Oh, Nancy, what's Thanksgiving without a good family argument? Just playing, kind of. And I would love, thank you for
That argument's been going all fall.
right. I would love to expand that. Like, I hate hearing Black History Month. Like, celebrate Black history all year. Celebrate Indigenous people all year and find ways that are natural, so it's not, you know, like manufactured and, oh, by the way, but it, yeah, I love that. It is our responsibility to weave that in the natural course of our life, of our interactions, of all our experiences. But yes, absolutely. We have time for maybe one or two more comments, and then I am going to jump in with a plug, and I will turn the floor over to my partners, Neil and Beth, to see if there are any additional plugs from the organizations they represent. So golden opportunity, who would like the last word in our discussion?
I think we can repackage history any way we choose, and how we teach our grandkids and our children about history. We know about 1% of the facts of history. So when we get down to the nitty gritty and we get into the sandbox, we can maybe write history by dealing with things like Indigenous Peoples Day, Thanksgiving, and maybe try to tell it from a different point of view. So resetting history, I think, Mark, you stated that, Mark Fuller, and doing in our hearts and with our families what needs to be done to make it right. Without a revolution. But maybe it takes a good revolution sometimes for things to happen.
Down for the revolution, Santo. So with that, I would like to remind you that the YWCA Rock County does still have the MLK Junior Racial Justice Award. Nominations are open through Monday, November 30th at 5 p.m. And as a reminder, the Racial Justice Award recognizes an individual that actively strives to eliminate racism and promote racial equality. You can nominate individuals by filling out the following form. I am going to briefly share my screen. So when you go to the form, you know exactly what it looks like. There we go. So this is the form on the YWCA Rock County page. It's not too overwhelming. They're going to ask for some information from you, the nominator, and then information about who you are nominating. So that is the whole of the form. You click submit, and that will come to me, and I will make sure that that gets to our committee. Neil and Beth, the floor is yours. Is there anything that we need to be aware of?
Well, the December, Jean, is there a December DAT meeting? I have down on the 17th.
Yes, Neil, there is. View from the Margins, and we're going to have two guest speakers, they'll be giving from a male perspective. This time, you know, so often we look at things from a female point of view, and we decided this time we were going to zero in on a male perspective. And both of these will be dealing with ethnicity and religious differences. And as Amy pointed out, they may be in the minority in the United States, but in the global view, they are not. And so it's going to give us a new perspective, I think, of how to look at people, how to learn more to respect each other.
Thank you.
So that's the 17th of December.
Amy, confirm the Martin Luther King celebration in January, would you please?
Absolutely. So we're actually going to be filming in December, but the MLK commemoration will air on Saturday, January 16th at noon. and that'll be on the YWCA Rock County's Facebook page. If you're doing, Amy, I'm not on Facebook, how do I see it? No worries. We are working with JATV and BATV, 2 local stations, to make sure that the content is re-aired. So you two will have access. Beth, we are at 7:01, but is there anything that we need to know that is going on at Community Action?
Well, just real quickly, yesterday we had a distribution with a couple of our community partners. We were able to distribute 60 turkeys and hams. But unfortunately, we had to turn away about 30 people. So earlier it was mentioned feeding people in need. That might be an opportunity. I don't think we're planning another distribution before Thursday, but I'm sure that there are places in the community that might be looking for a place to volunteer, people to volunteer, or possibly donations. Also, starting today, Community Action's offices are by appointment only through mid-January. So if for whatever reason you need to come to Community Action, just make sure that you call ahead first. And our main office number is 608-313-1300. And so once you have an appointment, then you'll be able to get into the building.
Perfect.
Amy, could you remind us how to save the chat room?
Absolutely, Neil. All right, everyone. If you look in the, well, first I'm going to stop the recording because I don't think everyone needs my tutorial recorded. So